Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Again, my name is Christopher Ellis. I'm a first-time NDSS presenter and an NDSS Internet Society Fellow. I'm very excited to be here today as a PhD student at The Ohio State University, a vulnerability researcher, and as a member of the Computer Security Laboratory. So I'll be looking forward to now presenting on our latest research here on deanonymizing device identities, and this is in collaboration with my colleagues, Yue Zhang, Mohit Kumar Jangid, Shushen Zhao, and my advisor, Dr. Ji-Cheng Lin. So starting with the bottom line up front, what we're going to be looking at today is a fundamental flaw in communication patterns, and this is going to enable, with adversarial methods, to enable tracking attacks, and we introduce those attacks as ID bleed. And this is going to inspire our mitigation that we call anonymization layer, which I'm going to show to have approximately a 2% overhead. So jumping into our inspiration here, as we all know, packets are observable, and particularly with wireless technologies, this can be a very powerful capability in adversarial hands. And through our research and looking at IoT devices, of course, we've poured through many network traffic captures, and we started wondering, what can we extract, or what information can we figure out here on these different communication patterns that we're seeing in these devices, whether they're paired or not, and is there any kind of insightful things there? And what we basically came up with is this side channel effect here, or basically this Boolean indicator of the relationships of these trusted devices. So what does this mean? So we can de-anonymize these exclusive use devices, which we define basically as devices or systems that have a one-to-one or a one-to-many relationship previously trusted by observing this side channel. And this is going to enable our tracking attacks. So here's a pretty high-level look at an observable side channel. Here at 1, we've got Alice making a request to Bob. Bob determines it's valid, sends a response back to Alice. We also see Charlie at 2 make a similar request. Bob decides, hey, this isn't valid, and actually does nothing. So this is the essence of basically exclusive use. We can now infer that there's a trusted relationship between Alice and Bob, understanding the protocol and how they're communicating, and then also that there's not a trusted relationship between Bob and Charlie. So at this point, you might be saying, Chris, you know, this sounds a lot like HBO's comedy Silicon Valley, hot dog, not hot dog. Right? But this gets a lot more interesting now when we introduce the fact that our attacks can defeat modern countermeasures such as MAC address randomization. So here's another high-level look. Here's at one of our 2 methods. We've got a passive and an active attack. Here's starting with the passive. So again, we have Alice, Bob, and Charlie, very similar to before. But now we've got, at a time T1, random addresses A1 and C1, and we can see a very similar communication pattern here. At a time T2, however, Alice and Charlie have both rotated their ephemeral identifiers. So now they're at A2 and C2, making similar request patterns, and then that we can see the difference and exposing that Boolean relation, or that Boolean indicator that shows that the trusted relationship. Now moving on to the more powerful active attacks here. Now we place Alice and Bob in different locations, and we place Eve in the middle, who can still capture packets, relay, and retransmit these packets into any other location here. So at a time T3, we come across some sort of unknown identifier. We go ahead and capture that, forward it on to Bob, and again, we see the response back. So note, even though in this network flow here, we do show the response from Eve back to Alice, but that's actually not necessary. As long as Eve is just observing the response from Bob, you don't need to forward that, but potentially, unless you're trying to like manipulate protocol state or achieve something with that in whatever protocol you may be looking at. So then at a time TI, we introduce Charlie, making again a similar request, and not seeing that response back from Bob. So from this, we can infer that Alice was indeed at location A, and sometime later, any of the identifiers that we're able to capture, Alice is not at that particular location A. So the real-world applications that we looked at here are basically features of protocols that would be able to provide confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and auto connection. We look specifically at common ubiquitous IoT protocols such as BLE and Wi-Fi, specifically secure connections, connection dating signing procedure, authentication and auto connection Wi-Fi, and then we also looked at some IoT smartphone companion apps. So here's just a quick look here at the wireless workflows shared between BLE and Wi-Fi, at least structurally, but both are generally going to have some sort of broadcast stage, selection stage, and then some sort of authentication and pairing stage before they start communicating. So use that as the basis for the next discussions here. So passive attack, again, pretty straightforward here with BLE confidentiality. We can just see in the bottom right that we have an encryption request and then the encryption response. This is just simply observing this behavior. But again, looking at the more powerful active attack, now we have a smartphone that has a trusted relationship with a peripheral, 2 different locations. We've got Eve in the middle, and we're now able to relay these packets and again observe on the bottom right that we have this response here in the encryption negotiation stage. And further, we actually found this is vulnerable to replay attacks as well. So we know this allows Eve to be able to capture these packets and replay them at another point in time to that peripheral. So that's highlighted right there in the middle, where we can see that Eve is capturing these packets, replaying it, and seeing that encryption response back. And then at some other point, you also capture some packets from an unknown smartphone. You could also replay that, but then you would be able to see this rejection message. Highlighted there in green and red. Moving quickly then onto the Wi-Fi passive and active attacks. This is, again, pretty straightforward. We see this just at the authentication before the probe requests and responses. And then looking at the BLE companion apps, again, we looked at some smart lights, a blood pressure monitor, a smart lock, and a smart plug. And we found that they were vulnerable to both our passive and active attacks. But here's a pretty simplistic look at this. Again, we're looking at the smartphone, trying to authenticate here with the smart lights, and simply just not having a password, incorrect password, is going to leak this Boolean indicator here. Here's a quick look at the distributed relay and replay attack network. So you can have Alice's home, which would basically just be housing some sort of peripheral. This could be any location. This could be an office or anything else there. But we have Bob as our peripheral. Eve is going to set up a node, which is going to capture the packets, transmitting that to the network, attack network server, which can then broadcast or publish out to any number of nodes that have been set up to be able to de-anonymize the device in different locations. So this all inspires then our mitigation, again, which we call anonymization layer. And we decided that a defense against ID bleed is going to have to provide several things. One of them being we have to be able to remove that transmission direction to basically remove data flow analysis. So this is removing the in unicast communication between a destination and a source. We also want to be able to hide the context so that you can't infer anything from specific packet types, and also provide entropy, so any kind of consistent payloads would not necessarily just be showing up as the same as the actual same encrypted bytes. But we also want to provide untrusted responses. So in that first diagram we looked at, Bob actually had no response to the untrusted device. So if this is a particular feature of a protocol, then we want to actually be able to provide some layer of ambiguity there as well. And finally, for adoption, we don't want to have any modifications to your communication stack. So we want to design this as a separate or additional layer that you can integrate. So we achieve this through a few features. One of them, basically, we're removing that unicast, and we're doing broadcast at this point. The random addresses are a rotating set of ephemeral IDs, which is going to remove the linkability. For encryption, that's going to remove the meta information or packet types and any kind of context. And we introduce tunable pseudo responses that are actually indistinguishable from the legitimate traffic. And this is all self-contained, so deploying this on some other communication stack, if you weren't directly implementing it into the communication stack, then you could use something like eBPF or kernel modules. Quick look here. So basically what we're doing is generating some random keys and exchanging them between Alice and Bob. You're going to XOR those keys to create a pairing key. and use that result to then generate source keys, and then basically using that pairing key also to create encryption keys. Or the base of the encryption key. So then you can also then generate the set of ephemeral transmission keys, which now acts as the source identifiers, as well as the paired encryption keys with each one of those transmission keys. And at that point, now the anonymization layer packet looks basically like a single source identifier and then an encrypted payload. So this is one of my favorite plots here because we can look here now at the overhead of the anonymization layer lookup and encryption on his PC and smartphone over our baseline. Pretty tight there, but let's look at some of these numbers. So we can see for both the smartphone and our PC laptop, we've got under 2% for a delta in overhead impact for throughput. In looking at our key resolution overhead, we actually have two methods. We have a hash and a cache method. The hash method is actually used in the field now, currently with BLE for IRK resolution. And we also have our new cache method. So we can see here from this plot, our cache method highly outperforms the hash method here, and with actual numbers. Looking at a smartphone, something reasonable like 16 pairs, we see we have sub 1%, where it's approximately 7% with the hash method. And on the PC, which might be representative, say, of a server or something larger enterprise-like, just over 1%, and then we've got 55% for the existing hash methods. Power overhead, we use different 0, 50, and 100% frequency of pseudo responses, and we achieved less than 2% power consumption too, as measured over 60 minutes. And this research was inspired particularly from bat attacks, but we do explore a lot of different more avenues in it, specifically on the different features and characterizations or characteristics of the protocols, and continuing into Wi-Fi and actually some other protocols as well. But more noticeably, being it hard to patch. So whereas the bat attacks was effectively a flaw in the allow list relationship, and how it resolved those keys. This is actually a fundamental flaw in communication. And although people have talked about this or looked at it, we believe that it's truly been historically overlooked and in the hands of an adversary with these methods that it could be used to track users. So just in conclusion here, we talked a bit about exclusive use, that inherent flaw in communication patterns, introducing ID bleed as our attacks that can track users, and then an anonymization layer as a reasonable, practical mitigation framework. We've got our source code available soon here, right on our GitHub, OSU Sec Lab. And with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you. We'll have time for questions. You can just line up in the microphones, state your name, affiliation, and ask your questions. I can start. I have two questions. I can ask first, and then if the audience doesn't have any questions, I can ask the second. The first question is like, what adversary can see? Like, what are the assumptions? Should they be in the same network? Does this work across a network? Should they be in the physical room to observe? Like, what are the assumptions about the adversary? Can you mention that?
Sure, right. So the assumptions are that an adversary can, use even just low-cost hardware, but with more complex setups, they'd be able to, extend this range. So there is a priori knowledge of a particular location that someone might be, but this is particularly useful, let's say, a person of interest or something like that, that someone's trying to do pattern of life analysis on. And might need to know when a person's at a particular location. So the adversary
should receive the BLE signals from the device that they're trying to kind of locate it.
Right. Correct.
And then the second question is, you mentioned different protocols. Is there something fundamentally different between Wi-Fi versus BLE for this method? Or you mentioned that there is this fundamental vulnerability between them. So just wondering if there is anything difference between them, like ZigBee versus BLE versus Wi-Fi.
Sure. Well, I mean, it really does come down to the fact that there's this Boolean difference in the communication pattern between trusted devices. So that's really the abstracted notion here that we were able to derive from looking at these protocols, these real-world protocols. So yes, where that happens at the different communication stages in these protocols, or for the different characteristics definitely is going to be different across any kind of wireless communication, whether it's ZigBee, Z-Wave, BLE, Wi-Fi, or anything out of the IoT realm as well. But it comes down to the fundamental flaw that there is this observable pattern, and this is what inspired our mitigation, to be able to remove that observability.
That makes sense. Thank you. Any final questions? All right, let's thank the speaker one more time.
Thanks so much.